I'm not sure if everybody else on the webinar today saw the adverts or the advertising for it or even attended. But last Saturday, we did a refresher course for the CDMP fundamentals exam. Just that kind of last and final loving nudge towards writing. Howard wasn't there, hence but Veronica was there. So there was it was a loving nudge. There was Veronica, and we got a fantastic compliment from a gentleman from Greece, and he just said, great course last Saturday, organized by Modelware Systems, honored to participate and very inspired by the active discussion and exchange of thoughts and practices by all participants, and especially Veronica Diesel. Willingness to share knowledge with us is definitely really appreciated. Thank you to Modelware for the offer and the invitation. So I just wanted to mention that it was obviously received well, great testimony, lovely words and compliments, and just a shout out to everybody else, because there's another one coming up. And if you're chomping at the bit or you're ready to hit the button to write the exam and you're just not doing it, I urge you to attend. We'll publish the dates shortly, unless Veronica can shout out what the date is. Sorry, I haven't got my calendar in front of me.
You're on mute, Veronica.
Last Saturday of every month. So the next one will be the 28th of August.
Awesome.
And it's free, guys. It's worth it.
So awesome. Thank you so much. Again, thanks everybody, and over to Howard.
Yeah, and just to mention, Paul, that Marissa wrote shortly after the session, and she got 84. She got 84%. So
awesome.
She did amazingly well. Okay.
Let me clap hands there. There we go. Awesome.
Okay, great. Excellent. So this month is data warehousing, BI, and big data and data science. So I always like to, lots of people ask, where's the big data? And I basically say, guys, it's all part of how to analyze data, and it's part of data analysis. So I don't see the reason to separate. We certainly use different techniques, but I always see them as the same. So, and it's quite interesting when you start to compare these two different chapters. Any of you guys that are working through the DMBOK and you start to compare the chapters side by side, it's fascinating what you come up with. So this is the schedule for this month. We are doing our data managers today. And the way I see it is all about that the data managers need to improve the the decision-making capabilities within the organization. So they have to do everything about getting this decision-making to work and getting it effective within the organization. Then we'll go on to data citizens, and this is an interesting discussion that we have. We've built what we refer to is almost our data trust transformation process, where we work with data citizens and we explain to them, how do you get messy data? And I'm not saying all our data is messy, and what I am saying and what we do recognize is it's almost impossible not to deal with messy data. There's data all over, and whenever you get it down on the websites and that, you're going to have to be dealing with this messy data. And we need to provide tricks and techniques. And there's some fantastic work done in R packages and Python packages that talk about the tidy and melting and conversions. And so that will be that one. That's quite looking forward to that. Then we got the DevOps. Sorry, I should have gone back on that one. And so then we got our data engineer or our data management professional that works in the data warehousing and the data movement. And then we've got our data executive that's having to answer certain questions in terms of the business growth, where the business is going, and how do we improve that business decision making. Okay, so that's the calendar for this month. Our focus is on data warehousing, BI, and big data. Our focus is on the DMBOK. So we will be focusing there. There are extra elements that I add, but I don't want to go too far away from that. But we want to just talk through those areas. So this is our first mind map that we have of data warehousing and BI. And Veronica's busy working on the big data mind map. So hopefully by next week, we'll be able to present that. I don't have it available to me now. So let's talk a little about the essential concepts of data warehousing. We have the data warehousing, we have the Inmon and Kimball approach, and I'm really excited today to show you some of the recommendations that Mr. Barry Devlin has put forward. Now, Dr. Barry Devlin, I don't know if any of you guys have read about Barry, and the reason why I like to talk about him because he stayed in South Africa for such a long time. He's now back in the UK. But and interestingly enough, is I think Barry Devlin was one of the first people to publish a paper on data warehousing. He published papers before Inmon did. But you can notice that he hasn't received that acknowledgement, and it's whilst he was working with IBM. So a fascinating person. His book is interesting. He gives you a history of just about everything with respect to computers and decision support. So nice to go through that. So there's the approach of Inmon versus Kimball. Inmon goes to the relational model, the time variant, all the aggregation and detail, historical. And then Kimball is dimensional modeling with conformed dimensions with the bus matrix. If you look at our data warehouse architecture, we'll talk a little bit about data warehouse architecture today. I think that's important just to understand those elements and then to see what Barry Devlin is suggesting. It's quite a different approach. How do we load? How do we load the data in terms of historical loading? Data vault, what's data vault done to us? Batch change data capture, real-time loading, trickle feeding. Those are part of our loading processes. Okay, then of course we have the activities that are part of the context diagram. We have the technology, and we'll look at what's appropriate for data managers, the implementation and the governance. So I see that certainly the governance or the data managers being responsible for maturity, and therefore they need to ensure the governance is being applied and we're achieving the metrics that we've set out to do, and we're achieving the business drivers and the goals and definitions. So that's what, in one single slide, that's the chapter on DMBOK. Love to get your feedback. I know there's a whole lot of movement in this area, but those are the core concepts within BI. Now, due to the fact that Veronica is a little bit slow on building her mind maps for me on big data and data science, I know she's got a hand-drawn one, but it's a little bit hard to read, and we'll get that out. Okay, then what we talk about in terms of the big data and data science, the important elements that we need to understand is the architecture. Howard sleeps on the couch tonight, yes. And then we've got the process, the typical analytical process that you're going to be following. And then I must admit, I like this Abate information triangle. That's Robert Abate, I believe. And we talk about this data, information, knowledge, insight/wisdom, and then how does big data interact, and the reference of smart data. Just from a simplistic point of view, we almost see this area, which is where we're sitting in BI, that looks at the present and the past, the business intelligence, and data science looking at the future. But you can't separate these two, okay? You can't say, big data is different to BI, and we don't, if we're doing big data, then we don't need to worry about BI. We've got to bring it all together. And of course, notice the fact that master data is this integrator and connection between the elements. So that's quite an exciting understanding. And you'll see if you go through these two chapters together, how all of them are dependent on master data, they're dependent on metadata, they're dependent on the quality of the data to make their decisions. So not a lot of difference. Okay, so if we look at the DMBOK's definition of data warehousing and business intelligence, the BI talks about planning, implementation, control processes to provide decision support data and to support knowledge workers engaged in reporting, query, and analysis. Oh, okay. So let me, Kripal, if we can, we'll talk about it a little bit later on in terms of your question on Inmon and Kimball versus top-down and bottom-up. And so we'll get there now. We'll get there pretty soon. So thanks for that question. And then big data, interestingly enough, is the collection and analysis of many different types of data to find answers, insights for questions that are not known at the start of analysis. So both of them are dealing with analysis. The interesting one is that we're using big data, of course, to pick up a lot more data than we have typically external data. And of course, that's not saying that we don't have big data within the organization, but it's then trying to provide answers and insights to questions that are not known. So the goals are to discover relationships, to point out these relationships to the business. So they say, oh, shucks, we didn't know that this person was interacting with that company, or they were using this product in this way. We were unaware of that, and that's what we're trying to bring about, is those extra insights. Both of them are there to enable effective business analysis and decision making. Okay, we're all there to provide that insight to make decisions and understand what's happening within our organization. So that's why we do these two different capabilities and why we established it. And then what I've done is I like to almost by each goal, the nice thing to do is, what is the output of that when you achieve the goal? And you do that, you deliver insights. We also deliver answers to questions. And what we want to do is deliver and ensure there are more questions. So, and the type of more question we've got as well, what don't I know? What's going on that I don't know? So I can see this thing, but why don't I know? What is it that's actually happening there? And then it drives more questions. And if you look at the outcome, for example, if the business question is why did it happen? We're then looking at the cause and effect recognition, that we can understand what caused the response in terms of we have negative growth, our revenue was down, our costs were up, what actually happened? And then we want to know what will happen in the future. So what are the future effects of this? So how long will this product be generating revenue, or how long is it going to take before it becomes a liability? And then we would understand the benefit of that is that the data that has matured to support data, information, knowledge, and wisdom along the business value chain. That's the benefit that we get on the insight. So once we've gone past information, it starts delivering knowledge and wisdom to us. Okay, what should I do? Understand the possibilities, the approach on optimization, how to optimize the outcome, and what is the benefit? We can make critical decisions promptly and well. There's less disagreement. If people can see what the data is saying and there's no biases that are operating within that, we should be reducing the agreement. We should have more unity about what the data is telling us, and we should be able to, or be more willing to take that next step and take faster action. The worst thing is you're trying to act and make a decision, and then something else happens, and it distracts you from performing those actions. Now, when you're also able to answer, what is it that I don't understand? So I'm seeing what's happening, but I'm not picking up. I may have some blind spots, and if the data can be showing blind spots, then it's even more benefit that you have in producing answers and insights. Okay. All right, so here are context diagrams, and I use this derogatory term of what vendors use as little data and big data. I'm not that keen to make that differentiation, but that's the way people refer to it. Our data manager is responsible for understanding the requirements that the business have on BI and data warehousing, and developing the data strategy and the business needs. So you'll notice there that understand requirements, understand needs around answers, around developing decisions and making decisions. And what are the deliverables? We're looking at the data products that we're developing, we're looking at the architecture, and we're looking at standards. And then, of course, there's this constant enhancement plan. So if the data manager is responsible for maturing, he's got to be focusing on the enhancement plan, getting better, getting the right getting the right roles, getting the right people on board to help with this process of delivering insights. And another word for that is decision support. Okay, so then if we look at the metrics as defined by the DMBOK, we can see the interesting thing is that BI is really pushing, because it's been around for so long, it's pushing for subject area coverage. So of your data estate, what percentage have you covered? What have you got? What have you delivered? What fact tables do you have across your business processes? How far have we got in providing people with the base information they need to start the decision-making process? And then where you see big data in terms of learning and stories, that's quite an interesting metric, and it's quite helpful, is as we answering questions, as the questions come up and the answers come up, we should be recording the fact that we've been able to answer it. And that's where we can start demonstrating business value. And we want those stories that have come out of data, we want to be able to catalog and show them and make use of that. And you can see I'm using those 5 wives and a husband, and the second husband, which is how many. Not how as the business process, but how many have we got? Okay. So let's go a little bit on the architecture. So here is the architecture that we've developed that has been around for quite some time. Here we talk about the data warehousing, or the central warehouse, or the CIF, which is the Common Information Factory as designed by Enmon. And then we've got almost the cubes in the dimensional model that's been designed by Kimball. That's where those different techniques come about. Now, let's go back, Kripal, to the question that you have of isn't Enmon and Kimball also about top-down and bottom-up? Now, it depends on how you approach it, in terms of, especially in terms of sort of designing your central warehouse. You would probably look to understand all the requirements before you build a EDW, a centralized data warehouse, whereas the Kimball approach can pull data from basically from the source systems and straight into the cubes. So I don't think it's specifically about whether I go top down or bottom up, i.e. in understanding business requirements before I build the cubes. For example, in dimensional modeling, a lot of the times what we suggest is you understand the questions and the decisions and typically the type of answers that you're going to be producing before you design the cubes. And that's my interpretation of whether it's top down or bottom up. I know when we spoke on Pupini, the Pupini bridge, one of his suggestions is that you can actually take a database and you can build the bridge table across a lot of the facts that are in that database, and you don't need to go into all the analysis of the business requirements when you use that structure. But I still feel that there's tremendous value in identifying your dimensions and facts, and i.e. coming from a top-down or a business question answer approach. Kripal, does that answer your question, or do you still have some questions about that? Okay, all right. So interesting thing in terms of we also have this understanding of what sometimes people refer to as a Lambda architecture, where we get some data coming in at high speed, or streaming analytics that comes along here. Some of the data can be batched and put into a warehouse versus a data mart, and it can take a little bit longer to get to the person who wants to consume it. So what we are seeing with big data, it's really trying to focus on reducing the delays or the latency that the data has in getting to people. And we do understand that there's a Lambda architecture, and within the DMBOK, Veronica, if I'm 100% correct, it's sitting in data storage and operations, but it does apply to streaming, the streaming type of data that's coming from external environments. Okay, so you have this is where these worlds live together. We don't see them as separate. We certainly see that when you're bringing in big data, that you will be talking to and linking it to your master data. So Kimball approach includes cubes as well. So yes, we've got the cubes and the data marts that come off the centralized data warehouse. So we've got, this is where the data warehousing is moving. This is more on your BI when you're doing the visualization and the analytics. And the difference between sort of little data and big data visualization is a lot of the times on big data, your visualization, your typical line chart or your bar chart, whatever it is, don't work that well when dealing with masses of data, and you need to find other ways of interacting with the data, especially on big data, to see the patterns that you need to find. Okay, then we've got the text mining. Now, if any of you guys have been around for long enough, I remember in the late 90s, in 2000, we had text mining already there. It was available to us. It's just hasn't become that, it wasn't as accepted as it is now, and we don't see all of the data science and analytical students that are coming out that can apply that textual mining and data mining. But it's been around since the days of BI. Predictive analytics, I'll find a lot of the times that's dependent on the tool, and you can be doing it in your self-service analytics. But so big data works on this thing of compare, evaluate, predict, and learn scenario. So any questions around the data warehouse and big data architecture? Is it something that you find difficult to bring these two worlds together? And Ravi, I think it was you that actually did that nice graphic or information graphic about the different types of analytics. I remember seeing the graphic post of yours on LinkedIn, just to be able to describe the difference between descriptive analytics, predictive analytics, the descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive, and it helps you answer these questions. And Ravi did a great one of somebody sitting in a dentist chair and describing the different types of analytics that could be performed. So nice to be able to go and see Ravi's image there. It was a fantastic image. Ravi, happy if you just drop it into the chat box and we can show people and give them more understanding. But it's all about us moving around this loop between information, insights, decision, and action. That's what we're doing, be it BI, be it data analytics. We're trying to generate action, decisions and actions. Udzani, I see your hands up.
Yes, you know, Howard, I always interrupt.
No problem, no problem.
How do you determine that you've got big data? Is it the format? Is it when you've got multimedia, or is it based on the volumes?
I think it's all four of them. I think it's volume, veracity, variability, and the four V's that you talk about that describe the characteristics of big data. So it doesn't necessarily mean that this may be external. There may be internal sensors that are arriving. There may be data analytics that you're doing on your documents. Veronica's just posted something there called 100 terabytes. I haven't heard of a specific size that then classifies data as big data, but it is the speed at which it comes at. It's the size of the data. It's the different types of data that you'll need. Does that answer your question, Hudzani?
100%, because you just never know, because people talk of big data, but we just don't know if they actually have big data. But yeah, I'm answered, yeah.
So those are the V's that you can see: volume, variety, velocity, and veracity. And then as I liked what you said, it's that fifth V, which is value. So, if it doesn't have any value, then why are you collecting it? And if it's adding value, then that's great. This one over here this is Ravi's image that he presented, and it was really nice. It's just a single slide that you could see what the different types of analytics were doing. So I have a toothache, all right, and that's almost, you understand what's happened, and there's your descriptive. And then in doing the diagnostics, the dentist could work out, oh, you've got some small tooth decay. This is what I understood. Now, this is just almost what we've been doing for so long. And then predictive says, if not treated now, this is likely to affect other teeth as well. And then the last one is, okay, I would suggest we remove this tooth decay now. So really it's a nice way to understand those different types of analytics, because sometimes we see it all and say, how do we apply it? How does it fit to our business? But I do like this thing of all of these different analytics are about answering questions. Okay, what is likely to happen in the future? What is required to do more? So that's your optimization. So how do I make this go faster and faster? And then so what and now what? So what do we do now? And then how do we improve it? So Ravi, we will get to some of the metadata management as well. We'll describe some of that coming through on Barry Devlin. So this is what I have built in terms of what the data management's responsible for. He's responsible for what I refer to as the data culture business transformation, data-enabled, data-led, data-driven, and then knowledge-driven. And I do believe there's more to being data-driven, and that's where we bring in our knowledge and knowledge management and metadata that we're associating with data to achieve those different levels. And we're now also referring to deep learning. Okay, so on the slide, we see all of the value chain on the DICWA, but this is what we're trying to do. And the important thing is you can't go from data disabled to data driven. Okay, so if, for example, you're in the situation where Paul was, where people are continually complaining about data and they don't trust any of the data, you aren't going to turn around the next day and say, we're going to drive you with data. They're not going to see the value of data, and they're not going to allow themselves to be led with data. Okay, so that's where I believe this is the role of the data manager. Get your processes going, make sure you have the right skills, you're able to implement processes to support the questions that you're referring to. Okay, so this comes back to the corporate information factory that Inmon built. We noticed that the movement of data is in this direction. Okay, so Veronica, that's great. You see there, Veronica saying that big data volumes are exceptionally large, and they're often petabyte and exabyte. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about the data governance as well, Kimball, in terms of that scenario. Certainly, data governance plays in terms of ethics and usage of data and the appropriate business case for data. So if we look at the movement, and this is the way Bill Inman put it together, you can see here we have operational execution to analysis. So we're coming from the operational, the applications through to the analysis, and we've got to get this data from here to the point where it can be analyzed. And the users are frontline workers to decision makers. These are the different types. So we have, I don't know if you've seen one talk that we had at one stage. They spoke of operational intelligence, and lots of people are saying, guys, we're missing a lot of our value when we don't allow the systems to be making decisions for users very quickly. So a simple example of that is, if I'm a mechanic, do I make a decision to replace this part or to refurbish the part itself? It depends on all sorts of costs. What's the right way to do it? And you should be able to provide answers to that mechanic as soon as possible. And that's everything from booking flights, hotels, whatever it is, you're trying to go to the level of operational intelligence, sorry. So system use, and then we've got response time more relaxed in terms of getting the data across and understanding and having some of the data latencies. And to do the exploratory analysis, sometimes you could wait for the thing to happen. It could take a while. I even seen in one of my customers that I'm working with at the moment, they were willing to wait for 3 hours for a cube to refresh. And then there's much more data involved at this corporate information factory. Okay, so the question that a lot of you should be asking is, but what about Data Vault? Okay, so let's have a look at Data Vault. And here we have Data Vault for EDW. And so you can see it goes with data sources moving to your data staging area, to your enterprise data warehouse, and then to your dimensional data model. Okay. Yes, Debbie.
Hi, I wanted to ask, what is the difference between the Data Vault and the Enterprise Data Warehouse?
Right. So that's a good question, Debbie. And it's interesting if you look at this, you should be asking that question. Well, what is the difference? You know, so if I look at the way in which the data is moving and the fact that we'll be analyzing it down the scenario, well, what has actually happened? And so there are some important differences about the model. And you'll notice in Dan Lindsted's Data Vault version 2 and some of the new discussions with Inmon is that they are saying that this Data Vault model allows data to come into the data warehouse a lot faster. And I was talking today and presenting today on Data Vault, and I like this one description of, it said that in the Data Vault, there's no distinguishing between good data and bad data in the Data Vault. So the Data Vault doesn't keep data in the applications or in the data source here because it has certain quality rules that ER diagrams or relational models enforce. So Data Vault allows the data to come in, and then you would have your data quality moving to the data marts. Okay, so it's actually the same structure. So there's not much more, and we don't need to be worried about it's throwing everything back up in the air. No, it's not really. It's allowing the data to come in quicker. It is more flexible because it's in some cases just these hubs that it talks about. It's got the concept of a hub and satellites. And the hubs are really just your business key of your key business concepts. And a lot of times you could build those initial hubs using a master data system, and then you bring in the satellite data from the source systems, and they could be different satellites and refer to the same element. Okay, so really what we're saying is the Data Vault model replaces the relational model in the EDW. That's really what we're doing in that scenario. We don't always have all those rules that are enforced at that level. They're enforced when they get down to the information mart. Does that answer your question, Debbie?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, and it's interesting to see when we look at this and we go back to Inmon's picture. We're really talking about the same movement of data and the same levels of integration. Okay. All right, so what is the Kimball dimensional warehouse? Okay, so we see with Kimball, he's not interested in building that enterprise, that common information factory. He goes almost straight into the data mart and then allowing the same type of BI reporting across the data mart. But what he's also doing is he introduced the idea of conform dimensions, which allow you to tie these data marts together. Conform dimensions would be things like customer, financial accounts and things like that. Organizational structures, products, that's sort of where you'll have your conform dimensions. And then you can drill across. So dimension, the UDM has this idea of drilling across, but you're drilling across using the conform dimensions across the different fact tables. Okay. All right, so what does Mr. Barry Devlin say? That what is different? And interestingly enough, he says, okay, this is sort of what we were doing. Ravi, you can see metadata across all of these areas. We got metadata from the cubes, from the fact tables, all the way through to the operational system, your data dictionaries, what your measures are, what your KPIs are. And so it's really important to have that metadata management across all the different layers. But what Barry Devlin is saying, these different staging areas and layers, that's what causes us problems in terms of timeliness, in terms of getting the data through to the front end, getting it to the user, getting it visible. And that's where you're seeing opportunities like data virtualization on top of a data lake they're pushing there. They can't wait for all of these layers to be moved across the data to get into the right value. So people are now just starting to try to report on top of the data as it lands. What Barry Devlin does talk about, and he says, we've got to change the layers to pillars. And these are his 3 pillars. And he talks about machine-generated data, process-mediated data, as in your business processes, as in your applications that implement your business processes, that they deliver in your transactional systems, they deliver your process mediated data. The machines are coming in with that big data. There you see events coming in there, measures, but events can also generate transactions. And then you've got human source data. And then he uses metadata and master data to assimilate what is being spoken about, what this data relates to across these different pillars. So, Gopi, yes, in terms of the data presentation area, where you're dealing with a dimensional model, that's fine. You could be making use of a dimensional model. Snowflake schema has some negative connotations to it. It could produce negative performance, but it can also be used very well for partitioning. And it's not, so in some cases, when you're using some of the analytics, the different statistical methods, you don't want a UDM design, you want a wide data set. So it depends on the type of analysis you're doing as to what sort of data model or schema you're dealing with. Okay, so you can't say that dimensional models or star schemas are going to answer all analytics. That's not going to be the case. Okay, so what Barry is saying is we keep the 3 pillars of data. We have ability to assimilate across these different areas. We have our context setting information being metadata and master data. He actually dislikes the term metadata in a way, because we treat it slightly different. And you can see these operational processes operating. So I actually quite liked his model, and I'd love to get him to present and explain a lot of this. It's a fascinating read. I enjoy reading it. He breaks it up into different contexts. And then there was someone else who spoke about data governance. This is a critical area of data governance, that as you move along this level from universal data, global data, enterprise, local, personal, vague, and unknown, your usage of that data is getting riskier and riskier. And we see that with data privacy as an example. We're looking at personal data, our risk has increased. We need to curate that usage of data, and we need to be careful. And so we need to reintroduce data governance at these levels. And here's just some different diagrams that Barry puts together in terms of data coming from humans. Those would be your emails, those documents, data coming from processes, and data coming from machines. And this is how he brings them together. And he introduces knowledge management because he believes that's part of how we link human data to human-generated data to process-generated data to machine-generated data. And he also focuses a lot on these processes. Act or monitor, evaluate, decide, act, and going through that OODA loop. And he talks about something called the MEDA loop. Monitor, evaluate, decide, act. So we're seeing lots of these common approaches across all of these different techniques, but and different people having different ways of thinking about delivering decision support. We've got to choose that right way of doing it. So are there any questions before I go on to the decision-making capabilities? Any questions about the architecture? Okay, and what you'll see with some of these big cloud systems at the moment is a lot of them are reducing the time that it takes to be able to access the data, for the data to land, and for the time taken for you to start producing analytics. And there's some fantastic work done in the different cloud warehouses that are coming about, and that whole data orchestration process. Okay, but it's at the end of the day, it's sort of a different version of ETLing and getting the data loading as quickly as possible. Okay, so decision-making capabilities. Let's go through some of them. What is it about? What does the manager need to get in touch with? He's got to get these requirements right. Once we understand the different requirements of what are the business goals and strategy that linking, then we're about getting the right architecture. And you can see the different architectures that we've been through, getting a technical architecture get defined, and then getting a management process. How do we manage these data products? Because we've now started to create the data products as we go through. Okay, so this is the challenge that most managers have to face now. And this was an article published by McKinsey, and it wasn't long ago. I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago, shortly into COVID. And they're saying all executives are battling with the same thing. How am I supposed to make decisions if I'm constantly surprised? Decisions are made by gut. I can't make the right call based on data. They don't believe the data can give them the right answers. Okay, and then how can we plan if we don't know what's coming? So the fundamental questions of what's happened, why did it happen, what will happen, when is it going to happen? This is what we're talking about. This is where our managers, our data decision-making journey starts, and this is how we start to uplift the maturity. Okay, this is where we want to get to, where the executives are saying it's much easier to hit our goals, and they can see the trends. That's your bottom line, so that decisions are based on fact. And this was a lovely analysis of all the top performing customers, top performing companies, and they were saying those top 100, whatever it was, something that differentiated them from others was the level of agreement and the speed at which they could make decisions. Okay, they're making decisions promptly and well, whereas in the other areas that they had this strong disagreement. So there wasn't trust in the data, there wasn't trust in the value that it was providing, and they would not be led by data. And we've got to get out of this mode. I think most of us are in there, and we've got to find ways of getting around that. So I did introduce here how do we fix the risks of data, both big and small, is when we start doing analytics on data that doesn't answer business questions, and we start just trying to find things. Yes, there may be some value, but in a lot of the times we're not getting the value we need, and through the questions and decisions, we're trying to align ourselves to this type of analysis, that everything is focused on our questions and answers and decision making. So whether you're using one metric that matters, whether you use North Star, whether you use Pirate Funnel, it doesn't matter. We've just got to be delivering answers to the questions and allowing the business to make decisions. And I love this summary of what is analytics. Okay, analytics is the measurement of movement towards a business goal. So is there any difference between BI, data warehousing, big data, data science? What is the difference? Is there any difference, or is it analytics? We're just answering different questions with different levels of techniques. We're using different techniques to answer those questions. Okay. What is the golden rule of metrics? That's where a manager needs to start getting these decisions defined, getting the metrics right. And the bottom line is, if you have a metric that doesn't change your behavior, well, throw it away. It's not having any impact. We all become couch potatoes. We see all this stuff, but it doesn't mean anything to us. Okay, so I love these measurement frameworks. And how many of you guys are out there that are part of BI and data warehousing, and you don't have a measurement framework? We're just building, we're looking at every single source, and we're more focused on covering everything and providing the fact that, oh, we've got a coverage of 100%, but what are we measuring, and what decisions and answers are we providing? I think those are better metrics than what we have now. These are just some canvases and examples that I can recommend that you use. We also provide a data decision-making journey where you move along the process from the business identity all the way to the decision-making approach. These are the techniques that you use. And notice the techniques are right at the end. All of this stuff that you're analyzing from a business point of view has no technology related to it. These are some of the techniques that we can deploy. And this is what I like to do when I build that driving the decision capability is, what purpose are we trying to do? What is our decision making required? What is our inventory of decisions? What decisions do we need to make? What is the quality of our decision making? What talents do we have? What methods do we use? There you can see the different methods: OODA loop, logical thinking, critical chain, Six Sigma, drum buffer, lean. There's all sorts of techniques. Now we got to know, once we understand our decisions, we got to know how to apply it. And in doing all of this, then we start looking at the type of analytics that we need to do. Okay, so it comes towards the end, and you've got to get the right frame so that we can apply technology appropriately and not just BI sounds like a good idea, let's go for it. Okay, these are different layers that you can answer. You need to look at strategic, tactical, operational decisions, and then you've got instinctive decisions. And I like this references, guys. We can't forget about the power of not thinking. Okay, some people may refer to it as RPA or digital decisioning, but I think a lot of times is when we're in a chaos mode, we've actually got to just start making decisions and then see what the response is and move on. So we can't always depend on data depending on the state that we're in and the state of information. A nice definition of decision quality. Working with our execs to understand the quality of the decision that they're making. And this is the decision-making framework that I've used. It's called Cynefin. It's after a Welsh area that they set up. And what they do is they break up the decisions into these different quadrants. And I like this scenario of saying, we don't need data in these different areas, which is chaos and simple and obvious. We understand what's going on, so we don't really need data, and data is not used in these areas. Whereas in complicated and complex, we certainly require data, but we require different analytical techniques. Here we're using confirmatory analytics, and here we're using exploratory analytics. So you've got to choose your analytical technique depending on your decision. And I'd keep on liking to come back to us as, guys, do we know enough about our questions and decisions before we start choosing the technique? Or do we just believe we've got to use this technique and we're going to find some value and we're going to find some correlation? I think we need to pay a little bit more attention to the decisions and insights that business want and catalog them and then apply the right technique. Okay, so for example, in this scenario, there are no patterns. Okay, so looking for patterns in this area doesn't work. Now you need hypotheses and probing to go. Here you are interested in patterns. Past tells you about the future. Past does not tell you about the future in this area over here. So choose your environment correctly and start to label where you got. So a really nice thing on Cynefin framework, go through it, look at the type of people, look at the culture that you need, and look at some of the challenges that you're facing. Okay, here's the management toolbox that you need. What tools to use, what approach to apply to this decision making. Learn how to use these different things. There's not just one way, and don't just let people come in and do your analytics for you and hope that you're going to get the right answers. A lot of the times it's the right business process that supports your analytics, not just the analytics itself. Okay, so I'm just trying to show you how you structure your smart decision making. And that's it for today. Would anyone, I know I went through pretty quickly, but I wanted to just give you an overview of what the data manager is, where his focus is, what he's got to try to establish within the organization. Of course, he's going to delegate work to the engineers, the professionals, and the data citizens or the data scientists. Any questions, any areas that you would like to talk about?
Maybe from my side, Howard, I think that decision-making framework is probably worth a separate webinar.
Yes.
Maybe one of the Damage chapter meetings. So it's nice. I think we've got a couple of topics lined up for that, right? But I think this is so important because if you don't start there, you can do a lot of things, but it will not necessarily achieve.
Yeah. And the nice thing that you are right, and the nice thing when you look at the type of decision making, you'll notice, for example, strategic decisions are more complex in the complex framework area. Your tactical decisions are more complicated, and then in your operational decision or digital decisioning, you're more in the known or in the simple quadrant. Okay, in those known areas. So the machine learning and AI that you're applying, there's lots of different ones that you need to do, and you need to find the right technique, the right analytical technique to answer those questions. And then in some cases, you also got to know when data is not going to help you. So don't try to analyze the data. I remember when we started with the COVID, and even now we're battling with data. If we really think about it, do we have sufficient data? Yes, certainly I can share the material as well, Kripal. What we like to do is get through the month where we deal with all the different personas, and we give you a complete picture of what data warehousing and big data is all about. Then we'll present it to you. Was that too much information, Mark?
Yeah, just a little bit fast for me. I've got coffee. I don't have an excuse. I slept well, but holy cow, you guys are ahead of me. I got so much to learn, man. Oh man.
Yeah, and not to feel out, Mark. When I go into organizations and I ask them about their decision-making framework, they don't even know what I'm talking about. And then we ask them, and then you've got people trying to introduce an RFPs on AI and machine learning, and I said, it's fantastic. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with it, but in what context is it used? And are we aligning up with that decision-making framework? So the biggest problem we find with data science today is that we're doing work, but for what reason? What is the business case? What is the use and the value of that?
Yeah.
So managers, you've got to bring in the framework. You've got to bring in the decision-making layers and the people and the methods. You got to have this. I remember JG always using it. You got to be fit for analysis, fit for analytics. So do we have the processes well defined? Do we understand how to apply this?
Oh, Maxime, I have another question. You had a picture about different kind of warehouse implementations, Inman and Kimball, but there's an ODS in there. So when and that also is a part of where we should do analytics. But
yes,
where
it is.
do you see the line drawn between when the ODS is supposed to be used and?
Oh yes, I think I've got it, Jerry. If I didn't, I'd be rather embarrassed. You see the ODS coming here. Now, some people put the ODS before the central warehouse so that is reduced latency so that we can get to the data as quickly as possible. And so you can see here, for example, Max, where the data comes straight into the ODS and not via the centralized data warehouse.
Mm. So do you consider the ODS part of, what should I call it?
Analysis, yes.
Yeah, but is that something that is centralized, or is that more part of the operational side?
Okay.
And it is, of course, have a name, operation. but who should be responsible for that? Should that be more of the central data warehouse team, or should that be more part of the?
I like your question there, Max, and a lot of the times I would answer that question depending on the skill levels that you have within your organizations and your departments. I was in one organization that was really battling with BI. The BI application, the centralized BI was not delivering value quickly enough, and everyone was just blocking up in the background. And so what we did was we introduced business-led analysis, and we allowed the business people to create an ODS for ad hoc queries and allowing people to ask questions of the data that they didn't have to fight with the main SAP system or whatever it was. So they could almost be in the format of a data lake that people could be asking questions of, or in data virtualized, a virtualized area of the data, and they could be querying the data without any major data movement and ETL work that was required.
Okay.
So if your BI department is battling, and you also see that you've now got new departments, Center of Excellences and departments coming out called Enterprise Integration, especially when you've got the mainframes involved. So it's not that easy for users to get that data. And if you've got that capability where they can land the data in staging, you could almost be presenting some of that ODS on top of those staging areas and allowing people to query the data as it lands. And those are the type of decisions that you're almost focusing on operational decision making in terms of that operational intelligence into what is the current state of my business, what do I need to do, and what's the best decision to make in this situation. So it doesn't allow a lot of time lapse or timeliness issues. It doesn't really tolerate that well, the ODSs.
No, I was just thinking, I mean, we have the different kind of application out there, I mean, the system of records. So, and then all the data for that is important to push to the enterprise data warehouse. But there is also operational analytics that is needed. So, and there is also another part that now when there is starting to buy applications and use SaaS services on the internet. Yes. The data is coming in various forms, and if you want to have a mapping to some kind of common semantic model,
yes.
Where, I mean, one way of separating that is to put in a operational data store and say that is part of that business unit's responsibility to secure that they cater for the separation of concern from whatever software they have purchased and how the data is then exposed inbound into other application and for data warehouse. But in that setup, the operational data store belongs to a business unit, not to a part of a BI, so to say.
Yeah, and so you can certainly overcome that because that data, and you can overcome a lot of the quality type issues because it's departmental, and you don't have to always ensure that more rigorous master data mapping and things like that. So you can be a lot more relaxed about the effort that goes into landing and reporting on the data in an ODS than you would in other systems. But what we're trying to do with an ODS is reduce the latency. The biggest issue is not having to go through all of this specific loading, getting the quality right, passing all the rules before people can start querying the data of what has happened in the operational system. It's fine if the operation system has some form of semantic layer on top of it, and you can just query that and it passes the query to the operational systems. That's another way of creating these operational data stores where you're making the data accessible. You're making the operational data accessible.
Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes the latency to get all the data integrated is quite long compared to
too much.
sometimes the value, so to say.
And Data Vault is doing a great job in that because it introduced that thing of I don't care about good or bad. I've got to land the data. when the data's right, and that's dependent on the downstream data mart, that's when I can start having the equality checks and things like that. But you can still query what's in the vault, what's landed there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's true. That pattern is quite interesting in that perspective.
Yeah.
But what is the trend now? Because I mean, there is now
If you look
different variations, I'd say.
Yeah, if you look at that Lambda architecture, and I pity I don't have it, maybe Veronica's got it somewhere. What the Lambda architecture is doing is that it splits, and that's why it's called Lambda. It splits the data set, the data coming in that's been streamed, it's splitting it into a batch mode that goes into the warehouse, that gets properly the context and assimilated, and then there's also the quick and fast landing of data into an ODS that people can query. And then overnight or whatever period of time that data is moved into the warehouse, and then almost the next day or whatever it is, depending on your timings that you choose, the data in the quick data store disappears and goes into your batch layer. So you're actually dealing with both. And I think that's what Veronica's just added here. If we look at this diagram, let's refer to that. It's this speed layer. So your source data comes in and actually lands up in both areas, in the speed layer and in the batch layer. And then you get the serving layer that merges these two together. That's what they're now talking about in with reference to the Lambda architecture. But I do know big cloud systems like, Paul, I forgot again. It's Snowflake. It is Snowflake, eh? And they are actually been able to deliver this data and present it almost instantaneously without any copying and moving of data. And they claiming to get a similar reduction on latency and improvement in timeliness.
Yeah, they have a quite interesting technology in Snowflake companies.
So there's almost this serving layer that one's involved with, and then what you can do with Snowflake is you can build data products, but nothing gets copied to the customer. It all sits in that one environment, and there's the movement has just been removed, has been reduced dramatically. But can you see the value of this sort of Lambda architecture?
Yeah, I do. I can see the value of it.
Okay. So you need something in the front to be able to query both that's sitting in that speed layer and the things that are sitting in the batch layer. Now, I had a scenario, Max, where I used Rollup on top of an operational SQL server. I used Rollup, which didn't require any processing. And then, so I'd look at what transactions came in on the trading system immediately. It rolled up in pre-aggregated dimensions, but I could query the data immediately. So those type of techniques on reducing the challenge are there and around.
Yeah, because there's also another challenge with the data warehouse that it is batch based.
Yes.
And if we are looking into the decision model that you were talking about, and there is a need for for a company to be working well, they need to be able to take decisions fast and based on different kind of data. But that also means that it's a requirement that the data warehouse is more fresh, updated more quickly, or that those kind of integrate or enterprise analytics is done in another way, where we are working on the fresh data. So that is also a challenge.
Yes, and hence the speed layer and the batch layer. And the speed layer allows the data to be there almost instantaneously as that event is recognized, it's landed in the speed layer. The batch layer will come over time, And that serving layer is presenting you what's in the batch layer and then what's also in the speed layer, and building a composite picture for you.
But do you mean that the speed layer is also integrated in the same way that the
Yes.
data warehouse is? Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes, you see this merged view. So that serving layer or data virtual data is presented across both of them.
Okay, so that is the trick then.
Yes, yes. You don't want to have those completely separated things, and that's what your ODS was doing, but it was always about the ODS delivering you decisions that needed to be made pretty quickly and dependent on the latest bit of data. It wasn't interested, it really didn't, you didn't need to worry about what was happening last week or last month or wherever that was. Now it's hard to say that, but sort of the idea of the ODS was to give you data a lot faster. It didn't have that idea of a merged layer or a serving layer on top of it. I think this is there's the different, another view of that. All right. They are in your in the chat box. You can actually see them. Okay. Any other questions? Anybody else have questions around it? Thanks, Max. It's really helpful to go into a little bit more detail around how to bring and make it practical and bring it all together. But a lot of this is based on the sort of type of decisions and what information I need that justifies the infrastructure and the platform.
Sorry, Howard, just a question. Don't you run the risk of the term too many cooks spoil the broth, of too many people or too many users actually messing around or working with new data in that layer approach, and in the sense of the data eventually becomes messy because not everybody's going to have the same type of methodology or the same type of building skills to get to certain results, because obviously if it lands in your ODS, there will be reasons for that. Yes. So I'm just thinking about I'm thinking about SAP data, for example, where it's based on like almost like if I can call it like a ticketing system.
Yeah.
So the data itself becomes very messy. The one person might decide to aggregate within the ODS and another person not. So is the risk of that data becoming messy not part of something to consider as well?
Okay, so what I do think is important here is almost the longevity of the information. So within your ODS, your data's been brought in and thrown away, and you then expected to get the real view of it or the complete view from the data warehouse when the data has been processed and landed in there. So the ODS is not there for long-term data, long-term sort of analysis. What I did with one customer, Marvin, is I actually built 3 different platforms. I built my operational stuff, and it was thrown away almost daily basis. And then if you wanted data from yesterday, you went to the warehouse to get the yesterday's and historical data. And we built that type of system to support a certain amount of operational reporting. We then had a tactical system that worked at month end. It closed down. It didn't allow any more data at month end, so you could all your financials, all your balancing, all your reporting information was there, and it never changed after that. And then you had your big analytic one, which was for years going on. And so you had these different environments, and you issued different questions to those different environments. So what you would look to do is not to do too many fancy aggregation, and in some cases you didn't really need that level of aggregation in the ODS because it was quick data coming in. You could analyze it and then you were gone, and you didn't have to keep on reducing the size of the data in the ODS.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's something to think about. Yeah, because I'm busy with that. Busy with a similar situation to that at the moment. Yes.
Yeah. So you are, you know, when we get into the dimensional modeling and we're getting to all those techniques of flattening and linking and tall and narrow, you're almost landing the data in its format that it landed in there, and people can issue SQL queries against it and say, what happened? What tickets were raised? You don't want to be doing too much processing, because that will prevent the data from being available.
Yes.
And data lakes are sort of using that approach where we're having big mainframe products that drop, almost using a change data capture technique. As the data change, they file out information about the transaction/product, and people can query it using a virtualized layer, but there's very little transformation happening on the data. That does not exclude the fact that you're loading it properly into a data warehouse, data mart that's doing balancing and assimilating the data across.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yes.
Okay. Pleasure, Marvin. Great. Paul?
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Howard. Awesome. Really looking forward to next week as well. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cool. You too. Okay.
Thanks. We'll make the recording available. Debbie will make that announcement. Oh, is that your big data? There you go. You see, I can. I'm not sleeping on the couch.
Well, I don't know, Howard. You need to make sure about that.